on that note, I think we're going to transition right now into our first main topic, guys. If you're watching this as a part of an archive, VOD, clip, highlight, short, all of that wonderful stuff, if you guys hit that, smash that like button, that's a great way of helping these out in the algorithm. Comment and share. Or join us over on Discord, where we've been doing many different community nights. We've got a lot of people within the community kind of stepping up, helping out with multiple different kind of games too. So it's been a real joy to see the Discord grow as strong as it is. And speaking of Discords, there's another Discord out there called The Balance, which specializes in really trying to break down and educate people on their jobs themselves. But over on Reddit, obviously that's a place where, you know, dumpster fires and frustrations get vented, or people who feel like they want to express an opinion get dunked on. Really, at the end of the day, social media is a dangerous place depending on your view of the world. Chris, why don't you break down what we're talking about in the post here, and then we're going to kind of talk about why we're seeing this, why we think we're seeing this, and what we can assume could be done next.
Every game has resources like these, and every game, it brings together people who are at a very high level and people who are just getting started on their journey and want answers from somebody at a high level. And that disparity is where 100% of the friction comes from. So let's dive in on that note. The Balance provides many resources, which much of the player base relies on. These include beginner and advanced job guides, as well as compiling encounter resources, mostly made by other people within the community. I lurk the encounter general, as well as several job lounge chats, and sometimes contribute if I know the answer to someone's question. I often ask questions too if I don't see my answer within the pins of the channels, usually early on after an encounter's released. Most optimization related stuff. I can't help but notice, but a few select terminally online mentors in that Discord are often very aggressive and toxic in how they answer innocent questions. I understand that many people who play the game are raiding every single day and night when content releases, and repetitive answers can get frustrating, but most people do not lurk in these Discord channels all day. The majority of users seeking information in the Balance are semi-hardcore, casual, and they are often met with rude, elitist responses to their question.
I'm so glad you knew what SHC meant, because I I had no idea. Semi-hardcore casual. That's a new. That's a great guess, because I was like, I've never seen that expression. Correct me. Yeah, we'll let chat let us know if there's another definition of that. Anyway, go ahead.
A common example I can think of is some people have a general question. Hi, I'm not sure why I'm dying to X, and they are asked to link a log. Then these mentors tend to crap all over those people included in that log for unrelated issues regarding optimal gameplay. Your scholar needs to learn how to heal. Unrelated, but your Reaper isn't pressing buttons. Stuff like that goes unchecked quite often. Anyway, not sure the exact purpose of this post. I just wanted to point out that one of the most helpful communities of this game has an unchecked elitist toxic aspect to it.
So I highlight the kind of the last point. That is like, I don't think it's unchecked. I think that's just how these things function. The question is that should we accept that? Should we allow that? Should we, you know, how do you like stem that? But at the end of the, like, they brought up a couple things that I thought was really kind of interesting. We know that, especially within the Balance, we've remarked on this before, and it's not just the Balance, but there is a weird divide. It's almost maybe in a way a generational divide between those who prefer a video format of a guide and some of those who prefer a written format of a guide. And the strength that the written still has over video is that if something changes, they can just go and update the section of the change. So the guide generally in written form will have the most accurate information. But the written form doesn't have the algorithmic power and demand that a video has. And so a video form can end up having outdated information, could be relatively quickly. And so we've seen that there's been frustration voiced against like YouTubers and content creators in terms of like even the Balance. But this doesn't, you know, I'm not signaling them out, because I see this happen in multiple kinds of games, this kind of mentality. And the other thing that's also interesting that I think Happy remarked on, which was like very true, is that if you want to be a content creator, you have to get, and this also applies to guide writers and even the Balance Discord, you have to get comfortable with the idea that you're going to be asked the same question multiple times repeatedly, especially on a live stream. And if you can't handle that, like, then you will not like this as a job. You will not like this as that concept, because people will come in, they have a question, and they might not have been there lurking all day. They might not have been listening to the whole live stream. They might not go and rewind and listen to a 3-hour or what have you. They're looking for...
You're also not going to enjoy working in a call center. You're also not going to enjoy teaching the same subject to students every year after year. You're also not going to... So like, as a skill set, this is not the only place that's going to drive friction. So just be aware that if that's a personality trait that you have, that is either A, something that you should strive to work on if you want to have more flexibility in that way, or B, there is a whole host of things that you need to avoid. I came from sales where I got asked the same questions about our product day in and day out, over and over and over. And if you don't learn to either thrive in that environment or have fun in that environment, then that could have absolutely been soul draining.
Yeah.
No. So
it can be. And and that's where it's like, you have to understand that if you're, like posting things, that you're inviting that repeatedly. The question is, in a way, like, how do you then mitigate that? When what our solution always has been is that, we'll give the quick answer, but we'll have a more detailed answer in a video form that we have a command for. Hey, like, yes, the answer is yes. And if you want to know why and X, Y, and Z, because I don't want to sit here and just having 3 hours of me just repeating this thing as everybody jumps in, like, here's the link. You can go watch that for the full detail. And then, we can discuss. So it ends up becoming like, in a way, like what Chris here in chat saying, in the opinion, it's not an elitist toxic issue, but a moderation issue and community management issue. And to a degree, that's yes, like, it's how do you manage it? But the thing that I would kind of try to put a cap on this, because Chris is our mod, especially like active on Discord, active on Twitch. He's an all-star. He helps work with you on Gaming Lore, kinda like the guy is incredible. And one of the things that we've all talked about is like, if the channel ever gets where it's growing enough, where like you're made whole, because right now, like, we've been honest, like, revenue's been way down. Like, we're getting by. We're all sitting here like
4 months this year.
Yeah. And
4 months I've ended with a lower bank balance than I started.
Yeah. And I know I've been relying on this a lot more, but we've talked about, like, we would love to be able to, like, pay our mods and pay our community leaders. When we look at some of the really big content creators like Comicstorian, that's one of the things that he's able to do because his size actually supports it. And that's both in like financial support, but also like being here and supporting and watching the videos, etc. Like, that is one of the ways of going about it. Now, if things are able to continue to grow, like, that's something we want. And when it comes down to community moderation and management, like, this is a cost. When we look at World First Raids, when we look at some of these things, like, there's a level in which that your passion can carry you so far. But at some point you're like, I have to pay the bills. I will be there next week. And one of the things that Comicstorian did to solve this is he hired his raid team. And people might think that's, kind of weird, but no, he hired them to help him make content. It was a business expense. It wasn't like he was paying for clears. He was like, you guys are my co-hosts. This is what we're doing. And when you are able to have that level and that support, you're going to bring about people who are then saying, yeah, I'm passionate about this. This is something I love, but now I can also justify the additional hours that it would take to moderate a full Discord. Like, our general policy in our Discord is mods have literally the final say. Like, if they say that you did something, I'm going to back them 99.9% of the time.
Because I don't have to mod mods.
I don't have, like,
they got the whole situation.
Yeah. Yeah, we cannot, like, not just us, but it's like, even with the mods, like, it's like, guys, like, we are a community of adults. If you cannot have an adult experience, like, if you cannot just realize that sometimes it's okay to disagree to agree, sometimes it's okay to sit here and just kind of like, all right, I'm just going to go do whatever. Like we don't have the resources to sit here and make this our job. And if we did, like, we'd be homeless. Like, there's that reality. I wanted to point that out because, like, Chris is a freaking rock star, and I feel like, man, I wish for his and also, like, with Wes, we got a couple of mods here hanging out in chat. Like, with y'all's support, we're able to do this. But if we're able to get bigger, we've always talked about the value y'all bring to this aspect, and that should be in my mind rewarded. I don't think the balance and other people have that approach, because there's always this weird line between fandom and passion and
Kind
your
of.
time, right? Go ahead.
So like Ren Karagani is a big member of the and like obviously he does this full time as a living, and so he's found a way to monetize his portion. It's kind of independent of them, but endorsed by them.
There's been some drama in between them.
They do endorse some guide makers, and so like they are kind of funneling resources to those people for the time they do. I think they were a big fan of like Wes Albert for a while, and so like I will say like falling out of favor with the balance not going to go great for you. Happens to be a pretty heavily mentioned community when it comes to like any new player that comes into the game and gets told like, hey, where do I find my melds and stuff? The balance tends to be the be all end all. So ending up on their crap list isn't great. They do hold a lot of power in that way. I came from WoW back when like elitist jerks ran that kind of thing, and in Guild Wars there's a website like that, and so like these resources exist, and it tends to be really nice if they're all in one place, because people want to kind of, hey, I'm having trouble healing this tank, and I want the tank resources in the same place as the healer resource. So it doesn't tend to make sense to have like a different website for every job or a different website for every role. So it's really nice to have it in that one place for a lot of communities. And some communities do split it up, but the balance has been one of the dominant forces. There's been others, but the balance has been one of the dominant forces in the 14 community, especially for the last couple expansions in like all of these players that come in and want to try Savage and try Extreme, especially when we've had like longer patch cycles where you have people who, it's not some WoW player getting into Savage that doesn't know what they're doing or whatever the stereotype is. It's somebody who's been here since ARR, and the content's always been so regular. They've had enough of whatever they've been doing, except now they don't. And so they're like, well, what am I going to do? I guess I'll try Savage. And so,
Yeah.
We ended up with some really well-documented Savage tiers. We ended up with some big community organized events that encouraged people to step into that. And when they start asking questions about melds and rotations and stuff, the balanced Discord is where we drive them. But this game does a couple of things. First of all, you have a primarily written community there. And so you are dealing with a group of people who prefer written guides, or are at least comfortable with written guides, which means reading comprehension is just baked in. Everything they've done, they've had to go out and consume this stuff written, and therefore there is a base skill set that like we spend a ton of time in our primary education system trying to make sure everybody at least has a functional ability to read and comprehend. That doesn't mean everybody's equally good at it. It doesn't mean everybody equally developed, but like it is something where you can see the difference. It was my worst subject in school, was that kind of reading comprehension. I think, with dyslexia, I assume it wasn't always a great one for you. And so that's been a hard subject for me to get better at. And so reading comprehension isn't my go-to. Now I have a master's degree, so obviously I was able to do it to a passing degree. That doesn't mean I enjoyed it, and it doesn't mean I thrived in that part of it. I did a lot better at like lectures and oral arguments, presentations, things like that. So I think for me, where the friction can pop in is you also have people who are being pushed to a written resource, but maybe that's not how they're best at learning. They're willing to try. And so they get told things like, just read your tooltips.
Yeah. Well, that's where video has a strength, right? That's how essentially we in a way got discovered for our content, because like doing our like podcasts and things like that people are like, man, like who are these guys? But it's like when it came down to it, it's like, okay, the thing that I constantly get feedback that people really like is the way that I break down and explain it. Now, like my life goal is to become a teacher, but my life goal also is to have a large family, and those things are antithetical to one another. Like it's like, okay, well, maybe in my mind I can go and work to get retirement. So there's a passion that I have for teaching, and there was always this weird confidence level that I understand when people are like, oh, I don't have the experience needed to really do it. And it's like, honestly, I think one of the reasons that has helped me is just like getting out there, not being worried about making mistakes. The thing is that you can learn from those mistakes, you can correct those mistakes, and then you can get better. And so over the course of this time, like I think that's why people regard the controller guides in such a premier form, because like if you go look at the originals versus now, it's like that we're talking about almost like 10 years of, like we've only been making YouTube videos for 6, But before that, I was still making controller guides and working and trying to help people out just in a very like direct way. So you fast forward to now and it's like, okay, now how can I level these up? And I've got these macros to help automatically set up people's hotbars. And so like overall, like I've continued to improve as a guide maker, because I think that ultimately is trying to help remove some of that friction. But this is going to tie also into kind of our other topic later, but just kind of tease it with the 14 for casuals. Like, it's great that we have the balanced Discord, but that's a free service that they're providing. Free means you're gonna get what you're gonna get. It's like rolling the dice with RNG. You are like, when you roll the dice, you might get a great party. Sometimes you might not. Now it comes down to moderation. Like, what's the level of investment and risk and time? Like, if we start just breaking it down into business thought and logic, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe the balance could do better in terms of their moderation and some of these answers, but they're also trying to play the game as well. They're like, what's their time worth? And so then when you factor that as well, is that all of this should be in the game in the first place, right? Like, why do we have to, within Final Fantasy's ecosystem, rely on this to help bridge this gap, right? Like, to bring it back down to it, like we've talked about, like just XIV analytics alone, that tool alone, the amount of time that people put in passion into developing that, if the game itself was helping to kind of educate the player, and no, the beginner, trial thing, and they've asked about a mid and a high, like a high end, like education thing, and we have not yet seen that in game, but there are things that the game could do to help bridge the gap. And so I don't think we're talking about players going to the balance because they want to be in the top 5% of the rating group. We're talking about players going to the balance because there doesn't seem to be another decent resource that can take them from, well, I just rolled on everything fine. There was no challenge. All of a sudden I'm being challenged. What am I doing wrong? And then you're like, oh, we one of the things we've often
doesn't want people like us. They don't want these mid-core players leading the basics, because then when they get to our skill level and want to actually go be really good at this game, then they have to fix whatever bad information we gave. And so anytime, I mean, they have picked individual guide makers who have made like one rotational mistake and just ripped them to shreds.
Yeah, we often laugh about it.
They want to be the be all end all.
Yeah.
Until they realize that means they have to answer questions all the way to the bottom, and some members of that community aren't ready to do that.
Yeah. Now we wonderful notification. Thank you, Chili, for that. Also, thanks Real Kitty Hawk, aka Wes, for the 5 gifted subs over on Twitch. Really appreciate that level of support. On that note, to kind of finish this thought, though, is that one of the things we've laughed about, I mean, we have just kind of laughed about it. It's like when we make a kind of getting started guide, I am talking to the player, and my goal, what I've stated publicly multiple times, is to take a beginner level player and stage them to be a mid-core player, to get them better, to get them curious, to get them being able to understand the things that I have learned, and that how I am able to do these things that they want to do. I'm not trying to get them to be a savage, but we've seen even in those guides, people will jump in that are like absolute experts, and they're like, how dare you say this one thing? You're setting them up for failure. And it's like, no. I'm inviting them into a deeper relationship with this game. But it's interesting that there is still, like, no matter what, like going to be a gatekeep metric. I've been blamed for bad tanks in the game when, like, just in our own studies and analytics, we've actually made people better tanks. We haven't made them like the best tanks in the game. Main tank by far, I think, is probably still the king of the castle when it comes down to that. And that was a whole thing a couple of years ago, which was funny with somebody just trying to dunk on him. But like, the idea is that, like, I'm not going to sit here because I'm not going to teach you something I don't know, and I don't have a passion for going and throwing my face against a wall for hours and hours and hours. So, what do you think?
So, I think the other thing that this is making this come up this time around is changes that were made with Endwalker. Now, there were a lot of changes made with Endwalker that had very positive effects, but that doesn't mean every pro has a con.
Yeah.
One of the changes with Endwalker, which, as they found people wanted to try playing more jobs, as people wanted to jump around into jobs, they wanted communication with jobs to feel cleaner, is they made some combat design choices with the intention of making the game more accessible, where they moved everybody to these fixed 2-minute burst windows.
Yeah.
And that's been the goal, to homogenize jobs towards these 2-minute burst windows. And if your job is sustain based or lives outside that 2-minute burst window, you're kind of getting left behind the bus, because what ends up happening is those burst windows stack on each other. And so if you are a player who slides off your rotation like I am, or you're a player who plays a class that doesn't benefit from those, or just an encounter causes some issue where you make a mistake and you slide off that, your DPS wildly struggles, because what these burst windows are doing is, for kind of a nice visualization, is when you're playing those little games, these are like a Guitar Hero. These are your big combo moments. These are your big combo massive moments. And so they are your massive point totalers, with your points being damage. And so it's gotten to the point where these burst windows every 2 minutes are actually becoming the dominant source of damage in a lot of these encounters. Now in P1 through 4, it worked out fine, but as we got into 5 through 8, where there was a real check in 8S. Any class that slides out of that, or any player that slides out of that, is suddenly actively holding the group back. And that, I think, drove a lot of friction and frustration where there didn't need to be any, because there was an argument before when somebody gets out of line and they get a little too frustrated. They've had a hard day. They've answered the same question 20 times and they just snap and they go, well, maybe just don't be a bad machinist, or some crap like that. Then people go, hey, machinists are getting the clear. You need to chill out. But what happens when machinists aren't getting the clear? Right. And so now that person feels like they're vindicated and like they're doing this service to go out and just lock these players away, because the content asked for more. So I think a lot of it is that we've moved to a battle system where actually the 2-minute burst windows, you know, from somebody who being told that I have to get it right for a full 2 minutes straight to have basically a combo button, or else I kind of, you know, fail the song metaphorically. That's a lot more stressful. That's a lot more anxiety. And that instead of, if you mess it up, yeah, it's a lesser combo window, but there's a combo window on the 30, the 60, the 90. You'll get there. That makes it a lot scarier. And I play Warrior, which in theory is a burst job, is how they always describe it. I don't know why it's lower on the DPS end. But in theory, we're a burst job. And so like, that basically tells me I should have my Storm's Eye ready to go as we go into the 2-minute window. I should be ready to pop some Bell Cleaves. Like, that's where I should be. I should be bursting. But if I miss that, and then I ask, hey, why is my group struggling? Right? Especially when we get into like P5 and P6, which ask a lot of mitigation for tanks. And so I say, hey, I'm here for a rotational question. Then somebody looks at my log and goes, you're terrible at mitigation. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of friction in the community. And so it's easier for these top end players who've already made that climb it would be easier to just play with people who are already up there with you and not reach down and help. And what I think the poster's running into is somebody that has made that choice. Probably just 1 or 2 people. It only takes one. It only takes one person on one bad day. They may not even be like that all the time.
Well, right. And we've said and remarked multiple times that, you know, you can take anybody in 30-second clips and you can make them look like the villain, or you can make them look like a hero. It really just kind of depends on, you know, like those interactions. And that's the downside, is that we do remember those negative interactions way more potently, at least for a short term, over the grand scheme of things. We can also, you know, tend to forget some of the bad things that happen. And Izzy kind of points out an interesting thing. She's saying, to play devil's advocate here, the balance isn't really there to be nice and welcoming. It's there for optimization. It's just the numbers and the analytics. And sometimes I've seen, and this is where, like, I've talked about the idea of the kind of the casual elitist, because there is the idea of elitism on the casual side. Like, you don't pay my sub is a really good mantra that you can see applied to that individual, where essentially like, oh, I'm here, roll out the red carpet for me, you know, as opposed to like, I'm, you know, here's the numbers, like, you're just not performing. And this content requires you to perform. Like, you know, for example, let's say I was, you know, negative 20% to where I needed to be. Like, there's a line, I'm 20% below the line. I'm asking 7 other people to pick up and carry not just their own self, but to make up my difference. Otherwise, we're just all wasting our time. And that's one of the things where we've talked about the difficulty in Savage, and I've had many conversations like on the live streams. Feels like these are dances. Like you need to learn the steps, and then you need to perform your part of the dance as best as possible. But the challenge isn't in learning the dance. I think most people can learn mechanicals and steps and things like that. It's in finding 7 other people willing to also struggle with you on that. And the fact is, like, it's interesting is that we are seeing pugs, being able to get, their clears, but not through all the way through the tier itself. And that's going to be
at
something.
this point.
Oh, they've gotten pug 8s done. Nice.
Yeah, people are doing it.
Okay. I hadn't heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, people are getting clears. People can clear ultimates in Party Finder. That's not the preferred method, as far as number of hours spent, and as far as consistency spent. But it is a method for people that have less consistent schedules and don't want to deal with that. There are people that like that. They thrive in that. And Mo Raines argues that makes you a better player because you're forced to continually adjust to different strats and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that like Warrior, in chat that there's a note saying Warrior doesn't really have a rotation. You just keep things on cooldown. Yeah, except that like I drop global cooldowns when I'm pressed in mechanics, or I break basic 1-2-3 combos. And so I think it's really easy for when you're asking why a balanced mentor gets really toxic. If I go in there and ask some question about a meld or something like that, or I go in and ask a question about a MIT optimization within P5 and I link my logs and they see that I apparently can't count to 3 because that's what my log says, then they're like, why do I even have to help this trash? Like, can't even count to 3. And it's true. Like when I'm pressed for mechanics, I can't count to 3. Apparently it's 1 2 1 2 1 3 1 1 1 2 3. Like every 40 seconds or more when pressed in mechanics, what happens is, in a release comes up and I forget that I was mid combo. And so I spam my fell cleaves and then I just start back at 1, regardless of where I was. And so I let a ton of potency and a ton of gauge fall on the floor every single time I'm in an encounter that I'm uncomfortable in. And because of the amount of time I have to raid, the little bit of Savage and Extreme I'm doing, a lot of times it's 1 clear. So you're not seeing something. It's like, well, that'll get better with practice. I'm not doing practice. I'm clearing it once and then calling it done. So if I go into the balance Discord and post a log, how do I get a log? I don't run ACT. How do I get a log? All right, great. I've agreed to break terms of service. I've got my log. Can you help me? And then I post it. Now, are they mad at me because like I'm asking questions? Would you rather somebody that plays like me not ask questions? And so when you ask why people are toxic, yes, I can understand why they find it frustrating to have to interact with somebody who it should be, why don't you come back to me when you can count to 3? But also, in theory, it is meant to be a resource. In theory, it is meant to be like, well, what helped you count to 3 when you were flustered? Because apparently you've mastered that, and that's great. I haven't.
Yeah, it's always interesting because also people respond differently to other people, right? Where sometimes tough love is the answer. Sometimes it's like, dude, you got to go work on your rotation. There's nothing I can teach you until you can press this button and then this button and then this button. And if that's too hard, if you're too fragile for that kind of feedback, there's other things in this game to enjoy. Like maybe Savage isn't for you, and that's a perfectly acceptable answer. Now it's a matter of how then it gets delivered is usually where this ends up, hitting the road, right?
And that you've labeled people as mentor, right? So when you're being told to screw off, you feel like you're being told to screw off on behalf of the community.
Yeah.
Because you want the most knowledgeable people in your mentor position, but you also want the most welcoming people in your position. And when those are not the same person, that's where leadership within the balanced Discord has to make a really tough call. Do you have people that are really nice and welcoming, but risk confusing or misleading?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you have people that have the information, but occasionally have to be reminded, I know you think you're just joking. I know you think that was like a nice sarcastic way to do that, but this is a text-based forum and you came across like a dick.
And text can also get really misunderstood, in that regards, because you can infer tone based off your own mood. Now, That's why one of the challenges I always try to put on myself is I always try to read the text in y'all's comments in the most positive light. And so and that actually sometimes annoys people. They're like, Brian killing them with kindness. I'm like, oh, thank you. That's so sweet. They're like, I was trying to insult you. I was like, oh, that you can't insult me. It's my superpower. On that note, though, it's like I think essentially what I would advocate for, especially if people find this kind of story frustrating or what have you, is that we need better resources in game. We need the game to kind of help, I believe, to step up. And the only way that that would ever happen is more and more feedback in that regards. Otherwise, review this as a resource. And if you get a snippy response, like you just got to let it roll off your back and just move on. Because these people are not like paid, in that regards. And even if they are, like, it's like in terms of like, how much time do you have? And where do you want to put that time in? Like, I know that I've remarked on this as like, for somebody just like giving me some like for this community and the hate that we're easily able to like disperse onto people. I'm like, I'm working on this thing for y'all because y'all asked for it, and I would rather just go play. It's like, this is time that I'm like, Brian, you haven't done this or this. It's like, no, I decided to pour 30 hours into this over here because it's going to make making people get into the game much better, and that's a win in my book. But yeah, you got to pick and choose your battles. You got to pick and choose where you get time, because it's not like I can be in the same place at the same time doing multiple different things. That's why you don't, somebody was trying to get me to do like extreme guides. I'm like, that's already covered. Like, I don't have the time to throw into that. I'm not going to have joy in that. So anyway, what do you think, Chris?
I think be reminded that not everybody is you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a chance to talk to some people that have been involved in the balance, and I don't know what level they're at, but they were telling me that like one of their frustrations, they were being really nice to me, but like I had mentioned, I was like, hey, I don't, there's a reason I don't do rotation guides. But there are people that do, and they immediately mentioned the person that they didn't like that does rotation guides. And I think it's really unfair to that person. And my response was, well, what don't you like about their guides? And they're like, well, they made this potency mistake here and it misleads, and they act like they're such an authority, but they can't even clear some of the content themselves. And I was like, so you can clear all the content on those jobs? And I said, yeah. And I was like, and you can do it either without mistakes or at least understand to a simulation degree what perfection is. Yeah. And you can continually stay on top of that information every single time that it could possibly change. If there's changes to a lodestone post or whatever, where they change something with that job. Yeah, I do. Great. Have you made any videos on that? No. Then how do people get to that information? It's in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So like, we're going to use the best information made available. And so if your information is better, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, then do it. And like, I don't mean that. And like, they're like, well, that sounds kind of aggressive. And I was like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, until there's a better option, what do you expect people to do? They're going to drink from the trough that's available.
Right.
So would you rather people just ask the question into the void and been like, well, none of the perfect people are willing to answer, so I guess let's just leave them alone? Like, they're going to go to the person that says, hey, I'd be happy to help you.
Yeah.
So I didn't even focus on, I like that person's content, but before I even focused on that, I just said, well, fine. Let's just assume for a moment you're right. Let's just permaban them from the platform. What happens then? Let's follow your logic. And they're like, well, I don't have time to learn how to do all that stuff. And I was like, and they did. So do you respect that takes an amount of effort on their part? And that's what they're focused on. And they're trying to be helpful, and that there is some good intent there, even if they miss the mark sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
so
100%
have you reached out to them and said like, hey, I just wanted to toss some, like, I'd be happy to kind of help proofread your stuff or stuff like that. And then be aware that if you do proofread, YouTube is a first or get out type
Mm-hmm.
game sometimes. So like, that doesn't mean I'm going to take 6 weeks to make some noted changes. No. Right. If they're done with their guide, it's got to go.
Yeah, it's got to go. And I talked to Happy about this specifically. It's that, and we kind of laughed and memed on Reddit when they were like designing the perfect way that YouTubers should roll out their guides. There should be the day one guide, the week one guide, then the edited and fully like community focused, like this is what the community term guide. And Happy said like he took it up on himself to go and it's like, I want to make the premiere guide and I'm going to roll it out a couple of weeks. And when he went and looked at the numbers, they were nothing. Nobody needs that perfect guide. They've all figured it out. Everybody just kind of wants to know what they're stepping into. So the day one guides, even if they have mistakes, are the guides that people go to.
And they get
that's
people
it.
through content.
Yeah, they get the win. They get the win.
And people are like, well, I know how to do it so much better now.
Cool.
Okay, then it sounds like you don't need a guide for that. Like,
Right.
like the guide was there to bridge the gap between I cannot clear the content and now I can.
Yeah.
And as long as it did that, well, now oh my gosh, I thought about it and I can do it so much better now. Great. Sounds like we don't need a guide for that.
Cheers.
And that's why that guide dies, because
Yeah.
because the optimizations get handled.
Right.
What we need is people who are like, I will not step in there if I have not seen the fight. Hey guys, happy here, and I just want to show you the fight. Okay.
Yeah.
Like that's all it needs to
That's
be.
all it needs to be. And it's the I think that usually just comes down to the textbook versus the reality. I see this happen a lot. Like when you go and you study, like this is the textbook ideal, and then you step into the reality of how people manage their code, and you're like, okay, well let's work towards that. The ideal is there to something as a goal we should strive for, but the reality is this is all the world we live in, and this is just the way it is. And so I saw Chumbany, excuse me, somebody in chat. Lucky Archery says, is it considered toxic to write a post on Reddit rather than actually reach out to the mod of the Discord and the server in question? And this is kind of where like that, like, you know, almost kind of what's the term that people use, like where they're just like virtue signaling. That's the thing I'm getting at. It's like, oh, look at me, I'm being hurt, I'm being hit. You know, like, oh, how mean is the 14 community? It's like, yeah, we have our assholes, like, and we know where they are, and they know who they are, and we shouldn't ignore them because they're giving the community, I think, a bad representation. But I agree with Lucky. It's like reach out to the mod. All these rushing to public, you know, like, oh, you know, somebody was mean to me, like let's publicly shame them, you know, on this regard. I think that's also a part of the problem because that gets them.
And they may have done
clout.
that as well.
Yeah. And maybe they did, but at least if they did, they didn't.
Or maybe for all the times that they've done it, we're not talking about it, right? So like
it did like, and there's a tool
discussion.
Yeah.
It did it.
Mm-hmm. And now here it is.
It's on FFXIV discussion. I just want to have a discussion about it. I don't necessarily want to like get them fired or have an argument with them. I just want to talk about it.
Yeah. How do we improve it?
FFXIV discussion. That's what it's for.
That's what it's for.
So I do want to stop and thank Astrager for 10 gifted subs and 100 bits, and Chili for 100 bits, and Les Banana for subscribing, and Kitty Hawk for gifting 5 subs.
Yeah.
And an anonymous gift to Lucky Archery.
Thank you guys.
All back to back to back.
Thank you guys so much. Thanks also for watching our YouTube videos. That's a huge help as well. So that is going to be this for the topic. We've got a new topic right now.